My name is Maria Gonçalves. I'm the international trade editor at the Grocer magazine. Before I outline our discussion for today and introduce our expert lineup of panelists, just a few housekeeping announcements. We'll go through them quickly. So all discussions today will be on the record, and we'll also be running a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please just use the Q&A function for any questions to the panel with your name and organization. We'll try and get to as many questions as possible. And if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll be sending around the on-demand recording when it's available. So what does it take to unpick a complex supply chain to achieve progress towards full traceability and ending deforestation by the meat and soy industries? That's the key focus of today's webinar, featuring an expert global panel drawn from industry, science, and environmental protection. Our speakers will examine the strategies traders and retailers are using to tackle deforestation in their meat and soy supply chains. As the EUDR deadline approaches and the UN's COP30 in the Brazilian Amazon grows closer, 2025 is a decisive year for combating commodity-driven deforestation and conversion of other valuable natural ecosystems. This year is also the target date for the most engaged companies to reach their deforestation and conversion-free commitments. The production of meat and soy for animal feed travel through complex and often opaque supply chains, making it difficult to trace their origins. The meat and animal feed industries are facing enormous pressure to disclose more information and metrics about the impact of meat production on climate and nature, particularly in vulnerable ecosystems such as the Amazon, the Cerrado, and the Pantanal in Brazil. Given the urgency of the climate and nature crisis, and the Amazon at a tipping point where it becomes a carbon source rather than a carbon sink, huge challenges remain, with some industry actors pushing back and stubbornly adhering to a business as usual model. However, others are more progressive and have been driving unprecedented transparency and supply chain action in the meat and soy sectors that are creating new business models and offering hope for nature protection and restoration. Today, we'll hear from two of the companies at the forefront of driving change. We've got with us French retail giant Carrefour, which has the largest supermarket chain in Brazil, and one of the world's biggest private producers of soy, Amaggi. Given that beef and dairy are responsible for most food-related emissions, we'll also discuss how companies can address the impact of industrial livestock production, including its outsized methane emissions. The conversation will focus on concrete actions to transform food systems, from ending deforestation to reducing the overproduction and overconsumption of industrial meat, while also accelerating the shift towards more sustainable plant-based foods that use less water, less land, and other precious resources. So we are delighted to be joined today by a stellar line of experts. Firstly, we have Agathe Grossmith, the ESG director at Carrefour. Next, we have Juliana Lopez, who is the SG Communications and Compliance Director at Amaggi. The Accountability Framework Initiative, or AFI, is represented today by its lead scientist, Leah Sundberg. Next, we have Indy Kaur, CEO at Plant Futures. And last, but by no means least, we have Glenn Orowitz, the CEO at Mighty Earth. So I'd like to invite all panelists to give their opening remarks. And please, can all speakers indicate when to move on to the next slide if they are using them? So we'll begin with Agathe.
Hello, hi everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you are. Well, just delighted to be with you today and to be able to share with you our journey on protein mainly, as they play such an important role in our climate and biodiversity roadmap. I'll cover today mainly our journey on the beef we sell in Brazil, as it's indeed a key point in this strategy. And I would like to start by saying that this journey was built with the support of a forest committee, gathering very trusted experts in Brazil, and they helped us making the right decisions and find the right path of travel in this challenging topic. So maybe the first point I would like to make is the first key milestone we achieved was really the decision to strengthen our existing commitment to geo-monitor all the farms that supplies the slaughterhouses that supplies Carrefour in Brazil. What did we do to strengthen this process? Well, we changed technology. We started using near real-time data. We added some level of verification internally, and we set very strong prerequisites with our suppliers for them to work with Carrefour. And we also ensured that we were covering most biomes, not only Amazonia, but also other biomes in Brazil in this geo-monitoring process. And this was a very important milestone for us, as we now have a very robust tool to check all these supplies and check them weekly for all Brazil. And we now have close to 30,000 farms geo-monitored over whole Brazil. Then another step that was very important for us was to ensure a wider implementation of our practices. Indeed, it's important for us to ensure that, for instance, if a farm is delisted by Carrefour, that we do not accept this farm, that our suppliers do the same for all the supplies that they may sell in Brazil, for our competitors, for the whole market. So we did maybe two, I think, steps that were very important. First, we started monitoring supplies of our suppliers in the past and check them with our new standards. So we checked an extra 8,000 farms, and thanks to this process, we asked our supplier to delist over 700 farms that were found to be not compliant. So that was an important step in terms of cleaning our supply chain. But also we worked for a very long time with the rest of the sector in Brazil, trying to ensure a wide application of the beef on track protocol and spreading or sharing all the practices that we've been implementing in Carrefour for them to be implemented in the whole industry. Because indeed, this transformation is to be supply chain wide and not only for one specific supply or one specific actor. And then the last and very important milestone was starting working on indirect farms. As you know, everything I just said is connected to what we call direct farms, so the farms that supplies the slaughterhouses that supplies Carrefour. But beef supply chain is a very long supply chain, so deforestation can happen higher up in that supply chain, and it's challenged to reduce deforestation for this part. So we first took the commitment to ensure that all our supply chain will be free from deforestation by 2030, which means concretely sourcing from low risk supplies or ensuring 100% traceability. That can be reached by knowing every step, every farm of the supply chain, or by entering a closed circle in our supplies, closed circle in the production. So we did that. We have this methodology now to define what is a risky supply chain or not, and we have now implemented that process of full traceability for our own brand products, and we are starting the journey on national brand products. So we're well on track for our target for 2030. And last but not least, the final step was to build up a transparency platform, because indeed we were receiving quite regularly some alerts from stakeholders about non-compliance in the supply chain. So it was important for us to be able to check these, investigate each case, and present a disclosure of what was happening and what we found out. And it's been actually quite reassuring, because thanks to the work we did, all the non-compliance that we confirmed were already excluded from Carrefour supply chain in the most recent month. And we also found some non-compliance that actually helped us strengthen the process. So it was really both reassuring for us and also helping in improving our process. So that was the major steps. I would like to mention that there's still some work to be done. We have other challenging commodities to work on, such as soy, that is used for feed in the animal product that we sell in various countries. We are working on this supply chain as well. And another important, I think, way for us, in addition to reducing the CO2 emission of this supply chain and the biodiversity impact, is also to develop alternatives in our stores, using the leverage we have as a retailer to sell other type of products, including vegetable alternatives, as they can be very useful in this strategy for us to achieve our 1.5 strategy.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Agatha, for your answer. I know you mentioned that soy was still a challenge. What do you think are the next steps for achieving deforestation-free soy supply chains then?
Well, good question. It is indeed a challenging supply chain, as it's more complex than beef, because once the soy is produced, it's going to farmers in Europe, for instance, for them to feed their animals. We are to get today we reach 28% of our supply chain, which is secured in various countries. It's still far away from our targets to reach 100% for Carrefour brand products. I think the first step will be to continue what we are doing, because well, 28% is not significant. Sorry, it is significant. 30% of our Carrefour supply chain is still a big step, and is sometimes ahead of what our competitors are doing locally. So we still need to continue to do that, even if it's not moving as fast as we expected. Second step will be to really work with traders and with importers to challenge their strategy, because at farmers level it's difficult to do that for our chicken producers or egg producer. But we can do that. We share some rankings with them about what we perceive as part of the strategy of importers and traders. And finally, the EUDR regulation, European regulation on deforestation, will be very helpful, because it will help bring a lot of information here to strengthen due diligence process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We now turn to Juliano.
Thank you, Maria. So first, just to present a little bit about Amaggi. Amaggi is also not only a soy producer, but also a trading company. Just to give you a few information, we commercialize around 20 million tons of soy, of grains, considering soy and corn. Our own production represents around 5 to 6% of the volume that we commercialize. So we work with the supply chain for the trading area that is around 6,000 farmers. We do not commercialize, we do not buy from all of them every year, depend on crop issues, logistics, and everything. So about 4,500 producers that we buy every year. And we have been monitoring them. I'm going to explain a little bit later. Can you pass the slide, please? In September 2021, we launched our goals and global actions to 2030. We had some goals already, but we presented new ones to the public. I will go specifically here on the DCF commitment and also on net zero by 2050. But this is an overview of all the goals that we establish on environmental, social, and governance. And specific in our ESG report, we explain each one of them, what we have achieved, what is we are still waiting to have some specific issues to achieve 100%. So you are able to track each one of them in our ESG reports. Next slide, please. So our DCF commitment is to have 100% monitor and track a grain supply chain free from deforestation and conversion of native vegetation until 2025, considering all biomes, countries, and regions where Amaggi operates. And in our own farms is to maintain zero deforestation conversion for agricultural production in our own farms. This has been done since 2008 in our own farms. Some numbers about the tracking monitor that we have. We already achieved 100% of monitoring our direct suppliers in Brazil. In the crop of 2023, and we present this in our specific report for that, we already achieved 52% of the indirect suppliers being monitored on a farm level approach, so it's a full polygonal approach. And we decided to have the risky areas, so the entire Amazon biome and Cerrado biome. We do not decide to have only some municipalities. So when we address a risk deforestation, we consider both biomes in Brazil and also Chaco in Argentina. we have achieved 100% on aggregation point, also on monitoring. Just to give you a few numbers, we monitor about 22 million hectares in a daily basis. This is a daily basis, and this is for agriculture production and native vegetation area. The area is about 9 million hectares of production area, and the other rest is on native vegetation. We have a full analysis on all our suppliers, direct suppliers, and this is totally connected to our system. So if there is any change in each part of the commercial structure, we are able to track this and make the decisions on the deforestation. Especially we have not only our ESG report, but our DCF progress report. It's a specific report that has each part in every year. What are the areas that we are monitor? How is the monitor? What we are doing? What we already achieved? Also, we have the information of what is happening in our supply chain since 2020. Next slide, please. So we were the first company in Brazil to join Science-Based Targets Initiative on soy sector through the Business Coalition. And we became the first grain and fiber producers and trader in Brazil to have the 3 targets approved by SBTI. The short-term net zero and flag targets approved was a couple of months. And we have been working on that with very specific strategies on regenerative agriculture, our B100 biodiesel trying to change from diesel in our operations to a full 100% biodiesel. And this is what we have been working on in our supply chain also, to address on regenerative agriculture to reduce the emissions in our scope 3 especially. I think due to time issues, constraint, I'll be able to answer more questions. The final slide, please. So as I mentioned, we do have our progress on the ESG reports on all the goals that we have, but also we do those progress reports that you see that is specifically on our DCF commitment. So every year we do present all the numbers, what we have achieved. We are finalizing the 2024 progress report. We are just auditing the numbers to guarantee that the numbers that we present on monitoring of the direct and indirect suppliers is presented adequate. And our commitment is to have also the indirect suppliers being fully monitored by the end of 2025.
Thank you so much, Juliana. You've talked a little bit about progress and commitments, but could you talk a bit about what challenges and barriers still remain that you're working to address?
I think the main challenge is when we talk about DCF is the indirect suppliers, as Agatha mentioned. This is still a very specific issue to address. But what we are seeing right now is that the indirect suppliers that we already monitor, and we decided to monitor the indirect suppliers in a polygonal basis, also a farm level approach on the risky areas as well. It takes more time for us to get the updated and all the information. That's why we in 2023 we finished by 52%. We have a very good increase that we are going to present with the numbers of 2024. And what we discover is that the indirect suppliers have almost the same success rate that we have on DCF approach in our supply chain, the direct supplier. But there will be some issues when you talk about indirect suppliers, because there are sensitive issues on commercial approach working with cooperatives. So you have to have a specific you cannot use only a single approach. You have to give more possibilities for your indirect suppliers to interact with you. So this takes more time to get in the full control of the information. And on the DCF, I think there is, on the net zero, I think there is a very good thing in our case, because our scope 3 is almost very similar to the scope 1. Scope 1 will be in our agriculture production. Scope 3 will be on the agriculture production on our supply chain. So we know what are the challenges. We know what is possible to reduce, but we know how hard it is to reduce. So all the things that we are doing as a pilot project in our own farms, this is being developed also to be implemented in our supply chain. So the point is that in our case, we are a big producer, and our supply chain may go to bigger, to small and medium producers. So that the challenge is to try to understand what is the main way to work in different levels of producers and different size areas, because the challenges are a little bit different.
Thank you so much, Juliana, for the insight. Moving on to Leah, if we could have your opening remarks, please.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Leah Sandberg. I'm the lead scientist for the Accountability Framework Initiative. For those of you who might not be familiar with the AFI, the initiative is a coalition of more than 20 environmental and human rights NGOs working collectively to help companies achieve agricultural commodity supply chains that are free of deforestation, ecosystem conversion, and human rights abuses. You can see all the members of the coalition on the slide. Mighty Earth is a key part of our coalition, so it's great to do this with them today. So the AFI works across commodities and locations to define good practice, identify available tools and data, and develop appropriate indicators and metrics for communicating progress on these topics. As Maria mentioned, this year, 2025, is a really critical year for action to halt commodity-driven deforestation in order to meet global goals for climate and nature. And at the heart of achieving these goals lies the necessity of transforming meat supply chains to protect forested ecosystems. Animal agriculture is responsible for more than 3/4 of agricultural land use and more than 14% of total human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. Beef production alone is associated with more than 1/3 of all tree cover loss associated with agriculture. In addition to the land needed for cattle pasture, significant deforestation is linked to soy that's produced for animal feed as a key component of meat supply chains. In fact, 80% of all soy grown globally goes directly into livestock feed. So therefore, the AFI is working across all of our members to identify key actions that companies should be taking this year to contribute to the essential transformation of these supply chains. The two previous speakers mentioned their work on a lot of these, which is really exciting. So the first thing that we are asking and looking for companies to be doing this year is to be setting ambitious climate targets that are aligned with 1.5 degrees of warming through the SBTI flag. This includes a commitment to eliminate deforestation and conversion of other ecosystems in meat and soy supply chains. Setting these targets requires getting buy-in within companies to make the changes necessary to meet these goals. Juliana has spoken about how Amaggi has been able to link their deforestation and conversion-free sourcing goals with these emission reduction targets to really have the impact that we need to be seeing. Second, companies should be working to improve their procurement policies so that purchasing reflects the company's policies, ensuring that it sources products that aren't associated with recently cleared land or with land speculation. Agat described really clearly how Carrefour is monitoring more than 30,000 farms across Brazil, allowing them to make informed sourcing decisions to both source deforestation-free products themselves that are compliant with their policies, but also to support engagement across their sourcing areas, including through their indirect supply chains, which both companies have spoken about just now. Third, companies need to be investing in sourcing areas to prevent new deforestation. Most deforestation inherently occurs outside of existing supply chains. It's before it's in anybody's supply chain. And so companies at all supply chain stages need to support proactive efforts to stop deforestation before it reaches their own supply chains. And then finally, we're working really hard to lay the groundwork for companies to be disclosing on 100% of supply chain volumes associated with their meat supply chains. And this includes the footprint of all the embedded soy in animals or animal products that they purchase. To support this, the AFI has developed clear and precise metrics and guidance to disclose this information. And AFI coalition member CDP has integrated these metrics into their disclosure platform, which opens soon this year. So we're looking for companies to be disclosing this year in 2025 on 100% of supply chain volumes, including embedded soy, with the understanding that as all of the work that the companies spoke about today improves, continues, goes forward across all these companies, you'll be able to see the deforestation and conversion-free percentages of those embedded volumes go up over time. So it's really exciting to see companies like Carrefour and Amaggi taking on some of these actions. Obviously, we need a far greater number of companies to take action quickly and decisively to achieve the transformation that we need. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leah. Next, we have Indy. Your opening remarks, please.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Indy. I'm the CEO of Plant Futures, a UK-based organisation, and my role in Plant Futures works with the industry and many organisations to drive the adoption of plant-based foods and plant-based diets. So we focus on overcoming the barriers that are holding back consumers and enabling growth. So if we go to the next slide. So I think it's probably quite clear in terms of science says that in most markets, we need to consume less meat and less dairy. And the benefits of adopting more plant-rich diets, and primarily driven by the benefit of increasing fiber consumption, the micronutrients that are within plants, and also diversified protein sources. So to do this, it all fundamentally relies on consumers wanting to try plant-based foods and changing their habits from more meat-heavy and dairy-heavy towards more plant-rich. We carried out a survey with Good Food Institute Europe and in partnership with agency Harris X to understand some of the behavioural barriers. So going beyond taste, price, texture of meat alternatives, what's happening at a behavioural level? What we found out was that actually there's a huge discrepancy between behavior around plant-based foods versus animal-based foods. So you'll see this in the chart here. So teal green is referencing plant-based and yellow is referencing animal-based and meat and dairy. One of the key elements was around capability. So how confident are you about cooking or preparing a tasty meal? Only 45% of the population. So in this case, it was the UK, similarly seen in Germany as well, are confident, whereas animal-based, over 80% of the population. The bigger, even more so than that, is friends and family. So that goes to show that social clustering is incredibly important. So very generally put, what you eat, what your friends and family consume is often what you will then consume. So the social clustering around this sector is incredibly important to take note of. And then obviously we still have taste and we also have habits. Most food purchases are actually quite habitual. And many people just enjoy the taste of meat and dairy. So there's further work to do in terms of taste, but it may not be necessarily improving taste. It may actually also be overcoming taste perception that plant-based food is just less tasty or it's less filling. Next slide, please. So what we're doing, we're running a pilot trial before thinking about more international expansion. So we're taking a universal systems change approach, which says we all need to move together, and I mean industry, so brands, retailers, organizations, all moving together in the same direction at the same pace. So there are no silver bullets. Next slide, please. And an example of this is a trial that we're running right now in the UK, just about to launch, where we have galvanized pretty much all of the plant-based category within the meat alternative plant-based protein space. Everybody's coming together. We've all united around one lead message, which is easy, which faces into that capability issue that most people still don't know how to make a tasty meal that's meat-free. So we're all going to be talking about easy, and we'll hopefully, through this initiative and a systems change approach, we'll be able to start triggering the adoption of plant-based, plant-rich foods, plant-based diets, and prompting trial. So it's a pilot. We're going to find out by the end of June what's going to happen, and then hopefully we can implement those learnings in other markets as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Amy. That's really interesting stuff. And finally, Glenn, your opening remarks, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much to all of our panelists for joining us. And congratulations to Carrefour, especially for the amazing progress that they've made. I just thought I wanted to just connect some of what we've been talking about. We're seeing continuing to see terrible deforestation in ecosystems across South America, driven 90% plus by the meat industry. Having said that, there has been significant reductions in deforestation. And so there seems to be momentum that I'm going to talk about today. But just to ground it, our friends at Panthera did a study of the consequences for one species, jaguar, of deforestation in 2019 alone, and found that it killed or displaced 1,470 jaguars, an endangered species. And so that's one of the things that I think about when it's at stake, when we're talking about these very abstract things, and both why we're trying to break the link between agricultural expansion and deforestation by focusing expansion instead of on native ecosystems on Latin America's 1.6 billion acres of previously deforested, degraded lands, and also why we're encouraging a shift to plant-based proteins that Indy was just talking about, because it has something like 10% of the land footprint and also reduces the methane and other climate emissions. Next slide, please, Jordan. And just to give you a sense of what we're seeing in the Cerrado, which is a big ecosystem that has been the core of meat industry expansion in South America. This is echoed also in the Amazon. Next slide. And the great thing is that we are seeing a emerging transparency revolution in the meat industry. We have previously seen palm oil industry, paper industry, rubber industry share a lot more information about who their suppliers are, where their products are coming from, and that has contributed to a 90% decline in deforestation for Southeast Asian commodities. But we haven't seen that progress in the meat industry, which has thrived on opacity until now. And we're really excited by Carrefour putting information about the alerts that they're receiving, what they're finding from their monitoring, and the fact that they're looking at something like 29,000 suppliers on a regular basis. Next slide. And that action by retailers is driving action in turn by cattle companies. And so we saw more than 800 discontinuations, if you go to the next slide, of suppliers. We saw more than 800 discontinuations of meat companies that were engaged in deforestation, and that was more than we'd ever seen in Southeast Asia. That spurred that really huge change there. So we think that there's a lot more that can be done. In Pará, there's a traceability initiative that a lot of stakeholders are participating in to require cattle traceability. That's really positive. It could be done across all of South America. And indeed, there's nothing stopping the cattle companies from going forward and executing it. We're also seeing that the major, Jordan, I think next slide, please. If it's or maybe, okay, just go back. We're also seeing that the major soy companies have taken commitments by the end of this year to eliminate deforestation and conversion. And that's also a positive change. Unfortunately, they have only used for the most part 2025 cutoff dates. So they're sort of very cynically allowing deforestation that happened over the last 5 years to occur. It probably encouraged a race to deforest. But the fact that they have all made these commitments mean we should be on a downward trajectory. And but there's a lot of work to do. As you can see, between 2022 and 2024, we had a lot of deforestation happened. So they're saying that this will end, and now we're hoping that that actually comes into force. So there's been a lot of action by the retail sector, and that's trickling down. And finally, next slide. And then on the key issue of moving away from industrial meat entirely, we have seen companies like Carrefour, Lidl, Ahold, and others make commitments, at least in Europe, to getting to 50-60% plant-based protein by 2030. And that, we hope, will allow the plant-based industry to scale. So there's a lot of reason for hope, but it will require turning aspiration, commitment, and progress on transparency into real action on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks to everyone else for your opening remarks. I'd like to move right into our conversation, and I'll be directing questions to each of the panelists, but just as a reminder, this is a live discussion, so if any of the panelists would like to add or intervene, please do. We'll start with a question for Agathe. What does the deforestation-free supply chain look like? How can you work with the other meat packers like JBS, and is there a place for indirect suppliers, and how do you address this part of the supply chain, knowing that they are playing the biggest role in deforestation?
Thank you, Maya. Yes, indeed, the indirect part of the supply chain is the toughest for us. I think we have now a very good base on direct farms. We are starting this journey, but the first step was for us, as I mentioned, was to build a methodology to address to find out when we have the highest risk, and then when we have this higher risk, to implement this full traceability that is needed. It is a challenge for suppliers, because it means going up and up the supply chain to build a traceability system with legal issues, with challenging issues in terms of IT and data. But it is possible. It is possible. We have the first step in already in our supply chain. So I think the work with suppliers is actually another way is easy. Obviously, we are in every discussion between a retailer and suppliers. We can have tough discussions, but anything we had achieved so far was within collaboration with them. So we had this very big step, clearing our contract, explaining what was the mandatory pre-requirements to work with the Carrefour. That's actually cleared really our messages of the level of ambition we have. And then we have a discussion subject by subject, but we see each other very often. And I would like to thank here my Brazilian colleagues who are doing a fantastic work in being in very close contact with obviously all our suppliers. But yes, all the delisted farm that we achieved was in agreement with our suppliers, and going up the supply chain will be as well built with suppliers. The key point here will be determination. I think now our commitment is public. We are moving forward, so there will be no other way basically than the roadmap we achieve. And if we don't find a way to secure those supply chain, we'll just move out to some clearer supply chain.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful advice. And for Juliana, what are your plans for a grievance log, and what have you learned during this process of achieving deforestation and conversion-free supply chains, as well as your process in setting an SBTI flag target? What can your peer companies learn from your experiences and your progress so far?
Okay, so on a grievance log, we are discussing this internally for a long time already. There are some specific issues about the Brazilian legislation on grievance log, which is a little bit different from the legislations from Europe and US. We have our confidential channel where we receive any kind of questions or whistleblowing information, and all the reports and questions that we receive from NGOs, from other, we answer this. But we are discussing how to implement a grievance log that really adequates with the Brazilian legislation, which is kind of difficult to establish all the process for a public grievance log that is there. But we are on the track to do this. I think what we have learned so far is that we have to combine let's say a proactive approach with the producers with a reactive approach when things happen. Of course, that when you see something, you need to block the producer, you need to understand what is happening. But a proactive, when you have the information on your data system, on new open areas that is coming, that is not related to your supply chain yet, but you want to see what is happening there. It's important, because what we have seen over the years is that if you do a proactive structure with the suppliers, with producers, normally they decide not to open new areas. They started to realize that they can go to areas that are already open. But we really need to work on financial systems. We need to work with the entire supply chain, financial institutions, to try to make this transformation process happen, because it's not only a company. We do not have producers that sell 100% of their products to us. So it's important to work with the entire sector and the whole supply chain, and the whole value chain. So I think these are the things that we have learned so far. We are able to implement control. We are able to implement data system that help us to work with the producers, but we do have to work also to the transformational approach.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much, Juliana, for the insight. And Leah, how many companies have set flag targets and how many still need to? And what does that tell us about the levels of prioritization companies are giving to addressing land use change emissions?
Yeah, absolutely. These flag targets, the SBTI's forest, land, and agriculture targets are really sort of the primary way that companies in this sector are able to communicate their ambitions for reducing emissions from their agricultural and forestry products in their supply chains in line with global goals. So by the end of 2024, about 149 companies had set flag targets, and now I think that number is somewhere around 200 or more. They're having, I think, one or two new companies a week set these flag targets. So I think this really speaks to the fact that these reductions are possible, that companies shouldn't be shying away from acting ambitiously to reduce these emissions. Some of these companies don't have large deforestation footprints that have set these targets, but many do. Of the Forest 500, which is sort of a list of the 350 companies that have the greatest impact on deforestation, 27 so far have set flag targets, which includes setting a no deforestation commitment with a 2025 target date. So in addition to that, there are 110 more of those companies on the Forest 500 list, and more than 600 companies across the flag sector overall that have existing SBTI targets, indicating that they're going to need to set flag targets in the very near future. So a lot of companies are finding that incorporating land use change reduction into their climate transition plans increases buy-in and momentum internally for making these changes. And maintaining this momentum is going to be really essential if we're going to be meeting both our forest goals and our climate goals at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Lee. It's good to hear of that progress. And Indy, question for you. Retailers play a key role in the food system. What is the role of supermarkets in servicing demand versus creating demand?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my role at Tesco, I learned quite a lot, actually. It was this act of service. So there was, well, I break it down to three elements. One is around act of service, and that is retailers providing safe, affordable food with great accessibility to the public. So there's that act of service, servicing their needs. There's then a sense of responsibility, so that'll be responsibility towards public health and sustainability and other initiatives as well. But then it's also remembering that retailers, they are a commercial business. So profit margins are important. Market share is also important. So it is a balancing act of those three. My role at Tesco, there's only so much a retailer can really do behind the scenes. So there's mechanics like promotional mechanics, there's positioning in store, there's maybe some small nudge trials. But beyond that, demand needs to come from external markets, really. And marketing and advertising plays a pivotal role when it comes to creating and generating demand, which then retailers can serve. So I think there's always a lot of pressure put on retailers to create demand, but actually when you're behind the doors in retail, it's not that easy, and you need brands and you need influencers and you need great marketing and advertising to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I think, Agatha, you wanted to add to Indy's
Yes,
response?
indeed. I agree with what Indy just said. It is we have a role to play. Obviously, we'll not do this by ourselves, but I think the biggest point, Johnny, we had in Carrefour was we started with our own brand product. We started by developing vegetable protein in our own brand products, but then we moved to having a global target in terms of global sales for Carrefour in vegetable alternatives. And we really worked on having the right offer. That was not that obvious to find the right product, making sure we have both, the specific product that vegetarian people would buy, but also other maybe slightly different product that a person you usually buying something else, so meat or animal products, will then switch to let's say a prepared meal, for instance. And now we really teamed up with national brands. So we have a coalition with national brands that enable us to activate some marketing in stores, some specific moments where we can showcase these products cross brands. So with our own brand, but also various national brands that are also playing a big role in making these products visible. And we can also sometimes break a bit the habits. We started putting some vegetable steaks next to the animal steak in the butcher section. It was not typical for our butchers in stores, but it breaking a bit the codes that does help. And we hope this will help us achieve our 2026 targets with 650 euros of turnover for vegetable alternatives.
Okay, thanks, Agatha, for the insight. It's really good to know what's happening sort of behind closed doors and what others can implement as well. Just one quick question for Glenn. How can we ensure continued corporate engagement against deforestation, especially in light of all the setbacks that we've had with CSDDD and also regarding indirect suppliers and the 1-year delay of the EUDR?
Well, I think there's a lot of political and regulatory challenge in the world right now. And so I think our task when we're focused on the private sector is to lock in positive changes where they are possible now, and that they can survive changes in political regimes. So if you had a return of a government in Brazil that thought deforestation or land grabbing was a good thing, the fact that the private sector was already acting and committed and set that up would endure. We've seen that in Southeast Asia, where the link between deforestation and agricultural expansion has been broken. It's been imbued into the private sector. And while there are some challenges with government, the progress has endured even when commodity prices have gone up, when government policy has changed, and we need to achieve that here. I would say that there's a lot of momentum right now. I mean, I think when you look at where we were 3 years ago, you didn't have all the soy traders committed to a DCF free date of 2025. You didn't have 800 supplier discontinuations at the cattle industry that Carrefour has announced. Today, Marfrig we've been working with them, and they've put online a similar transparency system. So there really is momentum. I also think that we need to work above all from a policy front and making sure that EUDR comes into effect by the end of this year. That will complement the work that the private sector is doing and create a level playing field and further incentives for change.
Absolutely. Thanks, Glenn. So we'll now take questions from the audience. If you don't mind, we're going to go over by 10 minutes just to get through as many Q&As as possible. If we don't get to all of your questions, don't worry, we'll send responses as part of the post-webinar materials. So we'll stick around until sort of 10 past so that we can get to as many questions as possible. So just pulling up the audience questions now. We have loads of questions. We have so Florence from Sustainable Views at the FT. Question for Carrefour. Agatha mentioned the need to boost plant-based alternatives in store and lower demand for beef products. I wonder what Carrefour or other retailers can do or are doing to actually increase uptake of these products, whether that is offering price parity with meat alternatives or changing store locations, etc. We know that Agatha's already touched on this a little bit, but if you can go into a bit more depth, please.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think there was other question as well about whether the ratio between vegetal and animal protein. Indeed, we need to develop sales of animal of vegetal alternatives, and on the long run, we will need to reduce meats to reduce the emissions. It's also an issue in terms of health. It combines two issues: recommendations from national authorities in the country where we operate often recommend to reduce animal protein. So we do need to work on it. It is actually absolutely necessary to reach our carbon targets. Without doing that, we will not reach them. So as I mentioned, I think there is the three layers for us. The first layer was really own brand, making sure, and we were very happy to share our first own brand products with a vegetal protein that was quite pioneer in France. But this was not enough because then we can't do that marketing on our own in the store. We do need a complete offer. We need brands, and brands are very strong. They can bring a lot of interesting products. I don't know if you, depending on the country where you are, but just to take the example of dairy, there's been a lot of efforts to develop kind of vegetal alternatives to animal dairy, and it's impressive how brands really took over these products and are helping to design these new visibility in store. So it's a bit of a switch for us in the way we work on the commercial side, really using all the leverage that we have in terms of price, in terms of loyalty programs, and also the visibility in store. We designed some very specific publicity to showcase the product in stores. We agreed with the brands what they will look like, and we try to focus. I think the term nudge was mentioned earlier. Um, it's important to mention that the product will be nice, will be tasty, will be so we don't always brand like vegetal or veggie or all these type of wordings, but actually that the products is appealing and actually nice is sometimes the main message. I hope that answers.
Thank you. And Agathe, now that we have you, another question for Carrefour from Alistair Scott. What does your geo-monitoring involve, and is your list of criteria publicly available?
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to answer in the chat, but I could not manage it, so sorry. So this is public information. You can find it on our annual report, and so we have a dedicated report on forest. It combines 5 factors. The first one would be deforestation and land conversion maps. We also have the lands that are under environmental embargo, protected areas, lands that belong to indigenous people or quilombolas, and finally land that is connected to illegal work or forced labor.
Thank you. And we also have, several people touched on this, and maybe this is one for Leah. There are several questions about disclosure and metrics related to deforestation and conversion-free volumes. Leah, can you share a bit more about how information about DCF sourcing can be publicly reported?
Sure, absolutely. So this has, I think, really been a big step forward over the last year or so, which is that the AFI Coalition, including several of the organizations that are involved in corporate disclosure or assessment, has been collaborating to develop a set of robust and quantitative metrics for disclosure on deforestation and conversion-free supply chains. These include metrics for reporting the proportion of material in supply chains that's compliant with commitments and the methods used to monitor or verify that compliance. That set of metrics has already been incorporated into CDP for this year's questionnaire, so it should be live now for companies to see how this is broken down. It's really clear to say, okay, what amount of your supply chain do you know is deforestation and conversion free based on monitoring of farms? What proportion do you know to be deforestation conversion free because of certification systems that you're using that provide that assurance? So really trying to link the proportion with the methodology to really show both transparency and provide information to stakeholders about what the company is doing to improve on these percentages. These metrics are also in the Global Reporting Initiative's agriculture sector standard and in assessment tools such as Forest 500 and the World Benchmarking Alliance. They're integrated into the KPIs of the Consumer Goods Forum's Forest Positive Coalition. It's already included in the annual reporting of a lot of leading companies. So I think really making it clear that this is a standardized way to report on this material that can be compared across companies, and that it allows us to see not that every company is already sort of perfect on this, but that progress can be made year on year in a way that's comparable.
Thank you. Thanks, Leah. Now we have a question for Juliana. You mentioned that working with indirect suppliers is more challenging and that it is important to have different ways of engaging with them. Could you tell us what percentage of soy you sell is sourced from indirect suppliers? What deadline you've been able to set for 100% DCF for the indirect suppliers? And also, are there more details on the different channels that you develop to engage with these suppliers, please?
Okay, so as I mentioned, there is one thing from our own production is 5%. So the 95% that rest is part to direct suppliers and part to indirect suppliers. It varies year by year, the percentage of indirect suppliers, but normally it's around 25%. This varies due to logistic reasons. So depending on where I'm selling more each year, there is a region that I'm buying from each year. So if we are using a logistic channel that is more on the north, on the central region of Brazil, it will be less indirect supplier. If it's more on the south of Brazil, that you have a lot of cooperatives, but also it's a reduced risky areas for deforestation in the south, you have more indirect suppliers due to the amount of cooperatives that work together with the producers. So this varies year by year due to logistic and commercial reasons, but the average is normally around 25%. We already were able to achieve 52% of the indirect suppliers in the report of 2023. So it was for the crop, the 2024, we are finalizing the audit process, but we really increased the number of indirect suppliers being monitored. And our goal and commitment is to achieve 100% of the indirect suppliers being monitored at the end of 2025. We are working different scenarios with the indirect suppliers, so we are able to use our own monitoring system, which is Original, where we developed ourselves with other partners as well, to have the full information of the farm. But we can also work with the cooperatives and other companies to have the same implementation that we have in their own system, and they give to us an audit report guaranteeing all the information that we need from our minimum requirements. And the other part is guaranteeing the region that are not risky areas. How can we monitor the whole municipality and guarantee that there was no deforestation happening in that municipality that goes to those warehouses? So there are 3 different processes that we can work on. This is a decision of the indirect suppliers on the intermediate, because since it's a commercial sensitive approach, this is more based on their decision of how confident they are on giving us the information or giving us the final report, or working on this if it's possible on the regional process. Then we can work together with this. So this is why it takes time, because it goes to a sensitive commercial process, and it's their decision, but has to guarantee that fits our commitment in 100%.
Thanks, Juliana. That's really helpful. We have another question on the JBS listing, which maybe Glenn could take. There is much talk about JBS listing on the New York Stock Exchange recently, and the company's relations with the Trump administration. Many environmental groups view this as very negatively, because couldn't the listing make it easier to hold this company more accountable? And this is a question to the panel, but maybe Glenn could take this. And it's from Massimo Quattrocchi.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've been working to change JBS and the whole meat industry through, what we call creating a perfect storm of engagement and pressure. So we're working to drive change with them through customers, like the actions that Carrefour has taken to be monitoring their suppliers and making sure that JBS takes action within its supply chains, as well as big other meat companies like Minerva, which has acquired many of Marfrig's slaughterhouses, and now is also a big major company exposed to deforestation. But JBS is by far the leading corporate driver of deforestation in the world, as well as the meat industry's largest contributor to climate change. And so one of the ways that we've been focused on them is by asking the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange not to go ahead with a listing in New York that could potentially allow them to raise billions of dollars more capital, which under their current business model could finance additional deforestation, additional climate pollution. Unfortunately, JBS gave the largest single donation to Trump's inaugural of $5 million. And soon thereafter, after 22 months of pausing the IPO because of concerns that the company had engaged in a massive bribery scheme and was fined $280 million by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice, they went ahead and approved it. We are asking the New York Stock Exchange to step in, because even if the government isn't acting, it's still a very risky company for investors. I do want to emphasize that if anybody from JBS is listening, our goal is not to punish JBS or any other company, but rather change it. And we need to do these kinds of campaigns sometimes to drive that pressure through the supply chain from investors, from regulatory authorities. But ultimately, what we need JBS and other companies to do is clean up their act. They have made, I would say, some modest progress, but they still are allowing deforestation and conversion, in the case, clearing the Cerrado, the Pantanal, and other ecosystems up to 2030. And that's just purely unacceptable. And so we hope that, when they see their customers moving and, bringing a new era of transparency, when they see the government of Pará requiring traceability, when they see their competitors like Marfrig bringing a much greater level of transparency to the supply chain, that they will have the incentive to act. And we hope the New York Stock Exchange will play its role in helping and also make sure its own investors are protected.
Thanks, Glenn. We have a question here for Indy. When it comes to plant-based alternatives, why do many retailers still add high profit margins to plant-based meat alternatives, which combined with wide-scale subsidies for meat production makes these products much more expensive than they should be when compared to meat?
It's a complex space, because one school of thought is actually meat and dairy is too cheap. So and actually then profit margins within meat alternatives and plant-based. I mean, chiller space is incredibly expensive. Like, it's quite expensive for retailers to run those chillers and refrigeration units. And so there needs to be a margin there. I think a lot of the subsidies that come in from the meat and dairy industry are able to subsidize and make it work for retail commercially. But we don't have the same setup yet for plant-based food. So retailers need to make a margin, brands need to make a margin, and it's a good one to debate. But I'd love to hear if Agatha has any thoughts on it as well.
Indeed, price accessibility is key in every transformation we need to roll out. If we don't provide price accessibility, we will not have the transformation we want. That's the first thing. So, but this is a bit the DNA of a retailer, is to try to have the best price for its clients. So it is challenging, because sometimes these productions are still a bit small. They are beginning, so it's tough to find exactly how the right position for these products. But yes, we need to work on the accessibility, and we are doing this. I'll take an example on another supply chain. When we sell bulk product, clients will not understand that the bulk product without the packaging will be not cheaper than the product with the packaging. So there's something quite similar here, especially when we are talking about a product that do look like the animal alternative. That's the first thing. But in some cases, we are talking about very different products, like almond, soy. If we could just talking about dairy or milk, like products, have very different price and different type of production. So it's tough to put one or only answer. But we need to work with all brands and have a lot of suppliers to have more volumes, make them less niche, and then enable accessibility for clients.
Yeah,
It's like any other, any leverage that we have with a promotion or loyalty. We need to use all of this.
One thing I'll add as well is that price within this category is one that we need as an industry to take quite seriously, because if prices drop too early in an early stage market, it can have later consequences. Where price becomes critical is when you've got the innovation diffusion curve and you get into mass market and you've got those late adopters. Shifting price then will get the rest of that market buying into the category. At the moment, I think it's important to remember that the plant-based protein and dairy alternative market is incredibly early stage emerging market, and we need to treat it that way as well. So be cautious over dropping prices too early.
Just to add to that, I wanted to say, one of the exciting things that Carrefour did with a variety of marketing practices was substantially exceed its goals for sales. And we've worked with them on, they are saying they're going to expand those marketing practices beyond France to other countries, which is a really step in the right direction. And I think the marketing is really important at this stage of where plant-based and other alternative proteins are, because some companies are engaged in practices that make it much artificially more expensive for alternative proteins to compete. We see supermarket chains offering meat as a loss leader, lowering the cost on meat to bring people into the supermarket. We see them tucking plant-based products off into some obscure corner of the freezer section rather than putting burgers, chicken, beef, whatever, right next to the beef and pork, where consumers can actually think about it and decide. The positive is we've seen a number of companies offer price parity and also make commitments to increase the scale. Ultimately, the goal on plant-based protein and all proteins more broadly is to allow this industry to scale where they can consistently compete on price and quality and taste and experience with industrial meat. And over time, that can lead to a dramatic reduction in the deforestation footprint and climate impact. I will say deforestation should be the low-hanging fruit of this effort to transform the protein industry. It is so easy to expand onto degraded lands. I think the simple actions that Carrefour took have already had major impact on the ground because it is so easy to expand onto degraded land, and because that is already where the vast majority of producers are expanding. And we need now also to complement that with a focus on scaling up all proteins so we can fundamentally allow millions of acres of forest to grow back and suck gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks everyone for the interesting discussion. We're going to go to a quick fire and then wrap up and recap on post-webinar materials. But if everyone in the panel could just answer this question quite briefly. Are we hopeful with the tools that are being deployed that we can achieve zero deforestation? Maybe order of sequence, if we could start with Agate and everyone can answer.
I think we have a source of satisfaction today. We shown that we were able to do very big steps. Obviously, we will always find some difficulties and some challenges. That there's no, I have no doubt about that. But let's first acknowledge what we already have. We have reached some very important level of transformation in the beef supply chain, even soy. I think the step we made, even though they are not big enough yet, they are significant. And EU regulation will be a major step, I believe. Obviously, when there's an alignment between the commitment of companies and what states push, any regulation from the state that is national or reducing the risk globally is helpful. So we probably still have some tool to invent for sure, but I think we can continue our progresses with what we have so far.
Thank you, Juliana.
Yeah, I would say that tool we do have, and the technology is developing very fast. So new tools will come also to achieve. I think the implementation part is what is lacking. There are some significant challenges on implementation, especially on other parts of the value chain, not only on producers, on tradings, and on consumer goods and retailers, but we need to address this also to input companies, to financial institutions, because the transformation for a DCF needs the whole value chain to be working together.
Absolutely. Leah?
Great. I will absolutely echo Juliana to say that the tools are not what's holding us back right now. We have the tools that we need to identify and address and support improvement across the vast majority of deforestation happening across meat supply chains. So again, as Juliana said, the question is, how do we create the incentives that are necessary for implementation? How do we get people to move even when the tools aren't perfect or the data aren't perfect? If they're good enough, sort of how can we create movement to move on good enough information? And also, the last thing I said, which is that, deforestation occurs outside of supply chains. How do we create collaboration for investment in these sourcing areas to prevent new deforestation from occurring? So we have a lot that we can do right now, and there's sort of no reason not to be moving quickly.
Thank you. Indy?
I would say the scale of the collaboration globally is actually quite phenomenal. It's quite rare to see some activities like this happening in such great coordination and innovation and technology all coming together. Supply chains operate with supply and demand. So we've got everything up the chain, all configuring in the right direction. What we don't yet have is the demand, and that's the pull, and that comes from consumers. So moving forwards and to future-proof this sector, we also need to pay attention to the demand, and demand isn't not to underestimate how difficult it is to shift behavior and create that demand.
Thank you. And Glenn?
When companies and governments really try to protect forests or achieve other nature and climate goals, they succeed. We saw in the soy moratorium starting in 2006, concerted effort from traders to eliminate deforestation for soy in the Brazilian Amazon, and it plummeted and has saved tens of thousands of square kilometers of forest. It's now under threat from state governments, but it's been for 2 decades a environmental and economic win-win. In the palm oil industry, in the rubber industry, in the paper industry in Southeast Asia, it seemed impossible to change these entrenched interests that were selling mostly to developing Asian markets. And yet when consumer companies, retailers, investors, and the traders themselves decided to set about it, they drove a rapid 90% decline in deforestation. And I think we're seeing the first shoots of that kind of transformation now, especially with the 800 discontinuations linked to deforestation and conversion that we've already seen that have been shared on Carrefour's transparency platform. The fact that Marfrig has just launched its similar transparency platform. And I think the fact that we're beginning to see engagement from a broader set of meat companies, soy traders, and retailers in South America and beyond. There's a lot of work that still has to be done. We're still seeing unacceptable levels of deforestation and conversion that is entirely avoidable. But if we can drive the action by the private sector, bring in complementary measures like the EU deforestation regulation, and deliver real resolve and real results, I think we'll see not only a significant decline in deforestation, but also expanding markets for all of these companies that can boost the prosperity of the countries in which they operate.
Right, thanks, Glenn. Well, sadly, it is now time to wrap up. Thanks to our panel for taking part in a lively and insightful discussion. Thanks to AFI and Mighty Earth for organizing today's event. Thanks to everyone who has joined. We had a super engaged audience and received a flood of questions. So we'll make sure that we'll get to each of them in full, so don't worry about that. We also have a full recording of the webinar that will be made available on request to all attendees. If you have any further questions, you've got the contact details there on the last slide, so don't hesitate to reach out to Alona, Carol, and Sid in the AFI and Mighty Earth comms teams. Thanks to everyone for staying on a bit later than anticipated. And yeah, hopefully this was as insightful to you as it was to me. Thank you and goodbye.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.